They were about 700 to 800 at that time that he had gathered together. They ended up growing to 1,200, but they encamped only meters away from a swamp. And the swamp was very much similar to what we would have in South Florida, like the Everglades. And in the movie, when they depict the scene on the big screen, you see as a picture flashes, it's just a swamp of reeds and grass and marsh and everything. I asked Michael Bialski about that. I said, when you look at the movie, I said, is it anything like where your father actually crossed? He said, ironically, he said the movie is actually filmed in the same adjacent forest in Lithuania. He said the Belarusians would not let us film on location. He said not to mention the Corps of Engineers there had drained that particular swamp. But from what I understand, the swamp is like 8 to 9 miles across. Another interesting thing, because it was 8 to 9 miles across at Nueva Beach, going into Egypt there. And when you read in the Hamatek's book, as she begins to speak about this particular crossing, she quotes Chaya, which was Asoil's wife, which was one of Tuvia's brothers. And she says in there, quotes her directly, she said, the reeds were so high, and trying to get through them was so difficult because of the marsh. And Michael told me, he said, Steve, he said, that is what really helped them. He said they had reconnaissance planes flying over trying to find the group. He said, but the reeds literally hid them from the Germans, and they were not able to find them or kill them. And another ironic thing, he said, that Michael points out to me, he says, is that not one single Jew, when the Germans raided them and they surrounded them, there was no way out. The head command of the Russian army had told Tuvia, he said, there's no way out. He said, you're either going to have to fight them or you're going to have to do something. He said, swim, I don't know, you got to do something. But one of the members of the partisans there came up to Tuvia and he said, I used to survey this land. He said, there's an island in the middle of the swamp. He said, we could go there. And of course the movie depicts, I don't think that it was actually said, but the movie depicts where his brother, Soil, comes up to him and he says, Tuvia, he says, God will not part the waters for us today, but with our own faith and courage, we will cross this sea. But ironically, no one, even from the movie, no one from history thus far has ever put two and two together that they actually cross a sea of reeds. And oddly enough, they go through, they survive on the island, they end up building a camp, they survive in the woods, a wilderness again for another year or so. And when they're finally liberated by the Russians, many of them, including Tuvia himself, go to Israel, to the Promised Land. And his brother Zeus and him were very close, as well as a Soil during this. So you think of, when you look at the story of Moses, you see Moses with Aaron and his brother.
Yep, interesting.
But there was no one like, as far, when it came down to to Tuvia himself, everyone looked at him. In fact, one of the partisans actually said, they said that the children of Israel had Moses for their deliverer, and in our days, we had Tuvia Bialski. Our contemporary Moses.
So, wow, that parallel is very, very provocative. Yeah. And the Nueva Beach site, that's consistent with Jabal al-Lawz as the Mount Sinai.
Exactly.
Yeah, I haven't followed the crossover issues as closely, obviously, as you have, but I have gotten into the Jabal al-Lawz arguments enough to be persuaded. I think they're very convincing. The rock that split and all the treasure. It goes on and on and on. It's amazing to me to see the abundance of evidence that identify Jabal al-Lawz as what we call Mount Sinai.
Right.
And the total absence of any evidence on the Sinai Peninsula.
Right.
And that is there still, I know there are some friends of mine that are still holdouts on the monastery up there.
The traditional site at Mount Sinai.
Yeah.
On the peninsula there, yes.
I forget the name anyway. But I mean, that whole thing is so amazingly specious, because you have no evidence of any kind that that's legitimate, and yet that's the traditional view. And yet now we suddenly have these discoveries and the confirmation and the zeal with which Saudi Arabia is sealing that off. It's fascinating how. But what your researchers are consistent with is the Jabal al-Lawz establishment. I think that's absolutely fascinating.
One of the other things that I'd like to mention to you here that I find find interesting in this, and this is more or less a domino effect that this story has brought in. One rabbi actually said to me, he said, in one way, we look for a second Exodus, although we know that, coming back to Israel has been an Exodus for us. But he said, with this discovery of Suph possibly alluding to a future event, he said it kind of makes us begin to look at also what Moses said in Exodus 15. And he said something that Rashi has actually commented on as well, and that is the Song of Moses, when Moses says, I will sing, Yashir. Rashi, and of course many rabbis and scholars have noted that Moses puts this in the future. And in Rashi's commentaries, he actually says that undoubtedly this would be something fulfilled in the Messianic age, that Moses would once again sing the Song of Redemption. And so when the rabbi was looking at this and we were discussing this, he said, so it's ironic to us to see if this indeed is a fulfillment of biblical prophecy, if it is a message that has been hidden in the Torah, that the word Suph was alluding to a future event, and now we have had a cyclical event where we have had another Exodus, so to speak. He said, then we want to go back now and begin to examine it from what Moses wrote in the Torah. He says, because Moses writes here that I will sing, and he said, you would know in Hebrew that is, using the aleph in the word, it puts it as a future event. It's not something that Moses would say it and sing it 5 minutes later, so therefore it has more of a connotation of some future event. I kind of bit my tongue on that one, though, Chuck, I really did, because what happened when he said it, this particular rabbi doesn't know I'm a Christian. He still figures that I'm Jewish, but just not maybe a good Jew. But I could not help myself but think of, oddly enough, in Revelations 15, when we see this group that comes out on the Sea of Glass, they've gotten the victory. And what do? But they sing the Song of Moses.
Yes, I was going to
and
get
of the Lamb.
Yeah, I hadn't followed all of that, but that popped right into my mind because that's in Revelation 15, isn't it?
Exactly, and so that's something I'm interested to see what your thoughts would be on that. And
well, I no thought. It's expressly made reference to. Yeah, I was going to 15. You say.
When you look at, there's also another one. Gosh. Let me see if I put it in my notes here, Chuck. I'll just check real quick. Okay. But there is there's another reference. Honestly, when I look at the Revelations 11 of the two witnesses, I know there's two school of thoughts. There's one for Moses and Enoch, and there's also one for Moses and Elijah.
Can't be Enoch.
Pardon me?
It can't be Enoch.
I didn't think so either.
He's not Jewish.
I've always looked at it being Moses and Elijah.
He's not Jewish.
Well, see, that's why we work together. That's right.
Well, you have to tell me something, though, by the way. They have a belief, I discover, that Enoch was translated on his birthday.
I've not heard that one.
And I can't track it down, but apparently there is a tradition, and I'm not sure the origin of that tradition, is that Enoch was, in Genesis 5, he's translated. And that obviously occurs prior to the flood. And Enoch has a child by the name of Methuselah, and that's named after as long as he's alive, the judgment will be withheld.
Exactly.
It's been preached on for 4 generations.
Sure.
The flood of Noah didn't come as a surprise. But what's interesting is Enoch is translated. He walked with God when he's 65. From that point on, for another 300 years, he's walking with God. And he is rewarded, apparently, with a son that caused to change his life, and apparently told that as long as his son is alive, the flood will be withheld, judgment of the flood withheld. And you discover when you go through all the details is that the year that Methuselah dies is the year the flood came. And so, but they have this tradition that I'm curious about, is that he was translated on his birthday. But I'm among those that defend the Elijah-Moses pair.
I always have myself.
Because of Matthew 17, where they appear at the Mount Transfiguration.
Exactly.
And if you examine Peter's epistles carefully, you discover that what they were discussing at Mount Transfiguration was the second coming. And it was an eschatological staff meeting, sort of.
That's right.
But the defining argument is the 4 powers that are listed in Revelation 11. 2 of those are unique to Moses, 2 of those are unique to Elijah. And one of them, strangely, it depends on understanding that Elijah not only ended the drought, he caused it in the first place. You don't find that in the Old Testament record, but you do find it twice recorded in the New Testament. Both James and Jesus make reference to it, which is sort of strange.
It is.
But, and it could be, what's so telling is the duration is 3.5 years, which echoes the half of Daniel's week. So it's amazing how those pieces seem to fit. So it's not conclusive proof, but it's one that persuades me that there's a high likelihood those two witnesses are those two characters. And that leads to the other mystery is why is Michael fighting with Satan over the body of Moses? Jude makes that offhand remark that his readers apparently knew about. We sit there and scratch our heads. What's all that about? Why is anyone fighting over a body? That's going to turn to, and why does it take? Why is Michael fighting with? I mean, there's this little
the dispute. Where's the body? And I think that's because Satan feels that his sins, that he's the angel of death. He should have known where the body was killed at.
And yet his body is somehow sacred. That Michael keeps his hands off of that.
Exactly.
What's that all about, and why? No one knows. We just will wait and see.
I think too that in this here, because I know from Jewish beliefs, when you have a Seder or Passover meal, in traditional Orthodox Jewry, you leave the door open. The end of the table is set, a place where Elijah is set. The glass is set there, and the door is open. Saying that we are ready, we are willing to accept your return, because they still believe that Malachi 4 is to be fulfilled yet. And of course we know with the two witnesses, with being Moses and Elijah, they would come. But I never knew from a Jewish perspective if they really believed that Moses would come. And as I begin to look at this, I don't think that they're implying it that Moses comes as a forerunner of the Messiah, but seeing this, it begins to give more of an argument if they're going to be led to Christ by the two witnesses, then certainly now we have a possibility of another proof then maybe that it does prove Moses, because in their own belief by Rashi that Moses would be